who are persons? What are persons? Why does it matter? So a person is not synonymous with a human being. And I think I've said this a couple times throughout the semester. In philosophy, person is a very highly technical term. It's not just Homo sapien, human being. No, it's this metaphysical category. It's possessing a certain capacity, being a person. And why is it not just human beings? The philosophers want to make room for possible cases of non-humans who, given their cognition, given their abilities, or given some other properties that they have, qualify as persons. So, like, I think I mentioned this in another class too. We can imagine that we are not the only cognitively sophisticated creatures in the universe. Like, the universe is humongous. So, the likelihood of some other intelligent beings existing out there is pretty high. And if these aliens came and visited us one day, they might be able to reason, they might be able to speak to us, they might have advanced civilizations and societies. We would call them persons. And why would we call them persons? Why not just say, okay, they're aliens, we're humans? It's because of the legal and moral implications of this term. So, in particularly the legal framework, a person has more legal rights than non-persons. So under the umbrella of like United States law, persons have much more rights. And we're going to talk a lot about animals this week and next week. But a few years ago, there's this court case in New York talking about whether or not chimpanzees should be considered persons. And why was this like a legal case? Is because the people who were proponents of that view, who wanted to consider chimpanzees as persons, they were hoping that categorizing chimpanzees as persons would give them additional moral and legal rights. So these chimpanzees were in captivity, and I believe they, maybe this is a separate case, but for a long time, the great apes, chimpanzees, orangutans, bonobos, gorillas, they were, it was permitted to use them in biomedical research. So they had these, really horrible scientific experiments done on them, sometimes for the betterment of humankind, so to test for vaccines and certain diseases, but oftentimes it was just for, really superficial reasons, like for hair products or for skin, like sun lotion, like things that we didn't really need. Maybe not sun lotion, we probably need that with, global warming and the sun getting a lot stronger lately, but like skincare, like anti-aging, wrinkle cream, things like that that are completely unnecessary for human functioning. We were testing them on chimpanzees, like putting cream in their eye to see if it would like cause a reaction, and just like putting them through some really horrible, horrible experiments. And for the longest time, this was okay because they're animals and we're persons. And so we get some legal rights, like the legal right not to be subjected to unconsensual experimentation. Animals don't get those legal rights. We can do whatever we want with them. Recently, there has been laws passed that great apes are no longer permitted as test subjects in these types of experiments. And even if you want to test like vaccines on chimpanzees and other great apes, there's like so many hoops you have to jump through now, and it's a really difficult procedure and process to use chimpanzees and other great apes as experimental subjects. This legal case in New York, I believe they were captive in maybe a zoo or some kind of sanctuary that wasn't really a sanctuary. And they wanted to move these chimpanzees to a better sanctuary where they actually would have space to roam around and, act like chimpanzees, not be confined in this tiny cage, very solitary environment. Chimpanzees are super social animals. So you can just imagine that they're incredibly depressed and miserable and suffering, a great amount of suffering. So some lawyers decided that, okay, we want to increase the moral treatment of these animals, so let's go the legal route and try to classify them as persons. So again, if you're a person, you are afforded more legal rights. If you're not a person, you don't have those legal rights. I mean, consider all the factory farms. Imagine if those are humans in those factory farms. I don't know if you know about the conditions of factory farms, but they're horrible, horrible conditions. These social animals confined in these tiny, tiny cages. Animals that are intended to move around and be physical they can't move around. They're chained. They can't form relationships with their conspecifics. But that's all okay legally because they're not persons. There's no legal wrongdoing there. Now, some philosophers have tried to argue that some animals are persons, and so that in virtue of their personhood, they should be afforded more moral rights. So remember, I made this distinction between a legal right and a moral right. Something can be legally right, but morally wrong. Something can be morally right, but legally wrong. It might be legally okay to factory farm animals, but for many reasons, independent of personhood, independent of moral rights, it's still morally wrong to keep animals in these types of conditions, in these living conditions. So some approaches to help increase animal social or moral status is by trying to classify them as persons. But if a person is not just a human being, if it's something independent of being a human being, then what are persons? How do we classify what a person is? So there are a wide range of possible definitions of personhood. The paper I had you read this week, Frankfurt, provides one such definition, and we'll cover that in the next video. But here are some other possible examples, or just within the philosophical literature. These have been ways in which philosophers have attempted to classify persons. So they appeal to rational capacity, self-consciousness, psychological continuity, first-person perspective, human nature, or moral agency. And there are other views in the literature, and I'm trying to condense it into these 6, but we might talk about more later. You might be wondering, why does this matter for the context of this class? Well, for one, this is an ethical view or an ethical problem, a problem in ethics. So since this is philosophy, ethics, and law, we need to cover the ethics part of it. And of course, this is philosophy, ethics, and law. And I just talked about how personhood is highly related to what legal rights we end up having. But alongside that, when we're talking about our moral theories, when we're talking about what we ought to do, how we ought to live our lives, what is the morally right action, what action should we take given the set of actions that we have available to us, we need to decide what beings matter. So our actions affect a wide range of individuals, human, non-human alike. But sometimes we have to make moral decisions where, okay, so 2 individuals are drowning in a pool, one's a human, one's a dog, who do you save, right? And you have to make some kind of moral deliberation about that. So who matters more, the human or the animal? And appealing to personhood might give you the answer that yes, we should obviously save the human. We shouldn't save the animal in this case. But, and I'm going to talk about this later in this lecture, there's this problem of speciesism, which is this idea that we favor human beings in virtue of them being human beings and for no other distinguishable property. And it's, according to some philosophers, just as bad as racism or sexism, where we just favor a specific race just in virtue of them being in our race and for no other morally relevant category or properties that they might possess. And so in distinguishing who are the persons and who are non-persons, we are able to kind of solve some of the moral dilemmas that we might come across in a justified, philosophically robust way. So if we can say that, okay, no, most humans are persons, most animals are not, therefore humans do matter from a philosophically justified point of view. I know I've talked a little bit about religion here, and I know that there are some principles in religion that say that, okay, man is top of the hierarchy and all the other animals are within our dominion. So we can use animals however we want. Why? because that's the way God intended. But that's not philosophically robust. And I've already told you the problems of using religion to justify your philosophical views. There are more than one religion, so there's going to be different principles, and sometimes these principles contradict each other. And so when we have a contradiction, obviously one of the principles has to be, it's like logically necessary that one of them is false. And how do you pick which religion is the correct religion? There's no way to know which one is the correct one. There's no epistemic justification picking one religion over another. And then there's also the youthful problem, which is like, um, if you're getting your morals from God, where does He get these morals? Is it something that He is willing, or is it something that He figured out independent of His will? And like I keep saying with this dilemma, that this Euthyphro dilemma, if it is something that He figured out independent of His will, then we can figure it out independent of Him as well. Anyways, that's why this matters. What creatures, what individuals are subject to our moral consideration? Persons or not persons? But also there's the flip side of like, who of all the creatures that exist in this world are morally responsible for their actions? So not only how should we treat other people, but what should we expect? How should we expect to be treated from others? And along with personhood, often, especially if we are appealing to rational capacity or moral agency, we get, yes, in virtue of being a person, we get additional moral rights and legal rights. But alongside that, we also get additional moral responsibilities. So we are morally responsible for our actions in virtue of being a person, whereas non-persons are not morally responsible for their actions in a wide range of cases. So it goes both ways. It's both who should we care about morally, and who ought to care about others morally as well. Like, you can't get all these moral rights and then not have any moral responsibilities. Maybe you can though, but if you're a person, the general idea is that if you get all these moral rights, you should also get some moral responsibilities. Now, we're also going to talk about in this lecture these marginal cases. So like the infants, the unborn, the severely mentally disabled. A lot of people want to say that they deserve moral rights as well. They deserve legal rights as well, despite perhaps not having rational capacity, self-consciousness, psychological continuity, moral agency. But why? Why do these people, or I shouldn't say people, why do these humans have these moral rights if they're not going to have that corresponding moral responsibility? I like an infant, like a 1-year-old, my 1-year-old cousin has some moral rights, right? Like he has the right to life, but he doesn't have any moral responsibilities. Like, he can pull my hair and he can kick me and he can slap me, and like, I'm not gonna be like morally blame this baby for doing this. It's a baby. It doesn't have control over what it's doing. It's not thinking about what it's doing. It's just a baby. So there are these puzzles involved in moral responsibility, moral rights, and a lot of these puzzles, or the attempts to solve these puzzles, appeal to personhood. And that's why we're spending a whole week on personhood. So let's go through some of these definitions. So rational capacity, that's something that Kant talked about a lot. He discussed how persons specifically are individuals who should never be used as mere means. They should always be used as ends. And so their rational capacity is what matters most in terms of his deontological framework. And what is rational capacity? So there are two types of rationality. Excuse me. There's theoretical rationality, which is like mathematics and logic. So, and I'm talking about formal logic, not informal logic. So it's this abstraction from our semantic content. So when we're speaking language, right, there's semantic content, there's meaning. So I'm saying a sentence and you understand what that means. But when you're doing mathematics and you're doing logic, you often abstract away from all that semantic content and you're working with pure syntax. So it's like solving puzzles. If you're if you take my formal logic class next semester, you truly understand what I'm talking about here. But I'm sure all of you have done some sort of mathematical proofs, be it in geometry or algebra or maybe even calculus. I don't know how far along you guys went in your high schools, but there's this formal process of just deductive reasoning. So you start off with this general principle and you're able to make inferences from the basis of that axiom. And yeah, we do this in math, we do this in logic all the time. But then there's also practical rationality. So this is like the rationality we use in our everyday lives. This is like informal logic, where we wake up in the morning and we realize that we have a wide range of possible options we can do. So I can get up and maybe go work out, or I can get up and I can get some coffee and start doing my philosophy work, or I can get up and walk my dog, or I can go back to sleep. I can sleep in a little bit longer. So the minute I open my eyes, I have access to all these possible actions that I could take. And as a human being, I have the ability to deliberate about each action. So I can think about what is required to fulfill that action. I can think about the consequences of each action. I can compare consequences of each action. I can compare the effort it's going to take to complete each action, and I can deliberate about which action to choose based on the objective set of values that I have in mind. So if I value education, I can deliberate about, okay, I should get up and start working on my philosophy, or I could sleep in. I can think, well, if I really value education, then I should get up and start doing my philosophy because that action corresponds with that value. Sleeping in until noon and being, just like playing on my phone, going on Instagram or Reddit, like that's not going to fulfill the values I have. Like I don't have a value to spend time on social media and not be productive. Or I do value unproductivity, but that's a discussion for a different day. I don't believe in laziness, but I do think social media in particular is a time sink. So that's a value I have, is that social media is just a way to waste time, and it's unproductive, but even in a non-productive, unproductive way. So your unproductivity should be productive in a sense, is what it's kind of the theory I'm going on. It's a baby theory, so don't attack me about this. But anyways, the point here is that with my practical rationality, I can deliberate about all the actions I have, and I can deliberate about the values that I hold, and then I can choose the best action from my set of actions that I have available to me to maximize my ability to satisfy my values. And that's practical rationality. So some philosophers are going to say that this rational capacity is what makes me a person and what makes you a person. Like, you all can do math, you all can do logic. I can do math, I can definitely do logic. We all definitely do practical rationality every single day of our lives, almost every single minute. Like, unless you're just like a mindless zombie, not thinking about anything that's going on around you, and you just go with the flow, like no matter what, you're using some kind of practical rationality. Self-consciousness. So consciousness is a topic in the philosophy of mind, and it's a topic that is not quite satisfactorily complete, I would say. Just every single theory of consciousness that has been put forth within the philosophical literature is just a whole other team of people who are just like, no, that's wrong. Like, there's no accepted theory of consciousness. So I'm going to talk about this just in a very cursory way, because like philosophy of mind, that is the class you would take if you want a really in-depth exploration of what self-consciousness is. But some want to say that some say that self-consciousness is self-awareness. So I know that who I am independent from the rest of the world. I can identify myself as myself, and I realize that I am separate from this external world. I can think about my own thoughts. I can deliberate about my own thoughts. I can reason within my own thoughts. These are all ways in which just very unrobust way to talk about self-consciousness. Like I said, there's so many theories in self-consciousness, so I would need a whole philosophy of mind class to go over this specific topic. Okay, but some want to say that self-awareness that's the key to personhood. Now, let me just go back first a little bit to rational capacity. So, does this rational capacity truly separate all humans from all non-humans in terms of this personhood criteria? Some want to say yes, that human beings have rational capacity. All non-human animals don't have rational capacity. But um, as we get better and better at working within the fields, the scientific fields of animal behavior and animal cognition, it seems like a lot of animals are satisfying some of the very baseline requirements for both theoretical rationality and practical rationality. It seems like so in theoretical rationality, there's this one hallmark is disjunctive syllogism, which is a logical argument. And it's this idea that you have A or B, you know, not A, so you can conclude B. So you have a disjunction, A or B or C or D or E, like that. And you know that's true, that statement's true. And you know not A, not B, not C. You know A's false, B's false, and C's false. From those two statements, you can definitely conclude like it is necessarily true that D is true. We can make this inference. And again, if you take my formal logic class, you will see this inference in action. I can prove that how I can show you how we can draw this conclusion given that information. It's a deductive inference. So it's in the realm of theoretical rationality. And we want to say that only humans can do logic. No non-human animals can do logic. But there's some studies recently on some dogs who are able to behave as though they're using this deductive principle. They're using disjunctive syllogism that they know a set of things are true. They know three of the things are false, so they infer that fourth one must be the true conclusion, and they are able to. So I can explain this experiment a little bit. This one dog has names for like 100 of his toys. I think he's a border collie, and they ran this experiment where they put a bunch of toys in a room, and then they said, okay, get the ball, the bone, or the I don't know, the pretzel. I don't know if you've seen those like stuffed animal pretzels. And then the dog goes in the room and he assesses, well, the ball's not in here, the bone's not in here, the pretzel's not in here. So he gets sorry, let me start this over. So the experimenter says, okay, get the rope, the ball, or the bone. The dog enters the room, he sees the rope's not there, he sees the ball's not there. And so he infers correctly to get the bone. And so some experimenters would say that this is an instance of deductive inference. This is disjunctive syllogism in action in dogs. So they want to say that, okay, so maybe dogs can use some logic. Maybe they are using some logic. And then there's even some cases where some animals are able to realize numbers. So they understand quantities, and in a very weak sense, that perhaps can be some kind of mathematical reasoning. So this is an important point I want to make. There are theories of personhood that require some kind of threshold. So you have to pass this threshold. If you pass it, you're a person. If you don't pass it, you're not. But then there's also theories of personhood that are more gradable. So it's like you can be slightly of a person, but maybe some other people are more persons. So like maybe infants and very young human children are like a little bit of a person, and then when they get older, they're a little bit more of a person, and then when they're an adult, they're like a full-fledged person. But others want to say that, like, okay, no, that little baby or the very young human child is not a person. It's not a person. It's not a person. Then it wakes up one day and it's like, boom, it's a person. When we're talking about non-human animals, I think a lot of the proponents, that the people who want to say that non-human animals can be persons, are going for this gradable scale of personhood, where non-human animals might be more of a person than an ant. So like a dog is more of a person than an ant is, but a human is much more of a person than a dog. But Here, when I'm saying that dogs can do some math and do some logic, I'm not saying that they're doing calculus or they're solving like Gödel's proof. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying that they can do some types of mathematical reasoning, some types of logical reasoning, not that they can do all of human mathematical reasoning or all of human logical reasoning. But another important point is how many humans can truly do all of the mathematical reasoning or all of the logical reasoning. I could not solve Gödel's proof. No way. I'm not that mathematically sophisticated in order to do that high level, amazing mathematical proof. And it's not even just me. It's like 99% of human population can't solve these highly intricate proofs. It's like this one genius that existed during this period in history who was able to do this, and no one else could do it before him. That's why, like, we remember his name, Gödel. Like, we know who he is because he's famous. He's a genius, and he was able to solve something that no other human could solve. So, to require that all humans need to have this super sophisticated mathematical reasoning, logical reasoning, would make a lot of humans non-persons. Why? Because a lot of humans can't do this high level mathematical reasoning, logical reasoning, and not even just like uneducated humans that have never done math or logic. Like highly educated people can't solve these proofs because they're not geniuses. Only like a one individual genius human could do it. But to require all humans do this, no. Now, most humans can do math, most humans can do logic, but a lot of just average everyday humans really struggle with math and really struggle with logic. And so I think that this gradable scale, which is degrees of capacity, really matters in terms of what human beings are actually able to do. A lot of philosophers want to talk about capacity in a sense is like, okay, so maybe we're not all Gödel, and so maybe we all can't do Gödel's proof, but we have that capacity in virtue of being a human being. Like if we tried really, really hard, we could do it. Or maybe if we were in a slightly different circumstance with slightly different parents and slightly different upbringing, then we would be able to do it. So the capacity's there, it's just never actualized. But I think that's problematic for a number of reasons. And if we all have these capacities that are never actualized, I'm wondering how relevant these capacities actually are if they're never actually actualized. But that's just a slight tangent to show that there are two different views here. There's the personhood, which is like, no one, you're not a person until you are. And then there's one that's like, you're slightly a little bit of a person, then you're slightly more of a person, and then you're an adult and you're like a full-fledged person. If you, and in terms of like this rational capacity framework, it would be you're a little bit of a person if you have a little bit of rational capacity. You're a little bit more of a person if you have more rational capacity, so on, so on. And then if you have like full rational capacity, then you're full person. And so that's about theoretical rationality. We can talk about practical rationality as well. So a lot of people wanted, in the history of philosophy, wanted to say that humans have practical rationality and no other animal has practical rationality. But now we're finding that even down to the like honeybees seem to like assess possible actions, deliberate about the consequences, and then choose the best action given their set of values. So it does seem that like it's not even just the great apes that are reasoning and doing these highly sophisticated cognitive feats. It's down to like the honeybees. And there's these amazing studies comparing like honeybees to ants, and how ants, you can like move them away from their home mound, and then they'll just mindlessly walk and walk and walk until they fall over and die. Whereas honeybees, if you move them away from their home territory, they immediately realize they're not in a familiar place, and they'll backtrack and they'll try to solve this problem with like a seemingly practical rationality. And of course, if honeybees are doing it, then we can imagine that there's tons of evidence that dogs can do it, horses can do it, and obviously the great apes, they have amazing practical rationality with what they can do in the wild and in these controlled experiments, these cognitive experiments that we run on them. So it seems like this rational capacity, on the one hand, tries to distinguish humans from non-human animals, but as we learn more about non-human animals, it seems like they're satisfying a lot of these requirements. On the other hand, and I'm talking about like again, those very young children or the severely mentally disabled, it seems like they are never going to satisfy some of these categories. So then if you want to be consistent, you're going to have to say that they're non-persons. And a lot of people don't want to call the very young children non-persons or the severely mentally disabled non-persons, because then they lose those legal rights. They lose those moral rights. And so a big puzzle, a big problem in this field of philosophy is trying to, I don't know why, but it seems like they want to make some distinction between humans and non-humans, and they want to cover all humans, even the ones that don't seem to satisfy these conditions, while excluding all non-human animals, even if they do qualify or do act to satisfy a lot of these conditions. And this is the work I work on, so that's why I'm super interested in this. The same thing kind of applies to self-consciousness. So for a long time, people wanted to say that all humans are self-aware, that we have self-consciousness, and all animals are not. But the problem with this, again, is as we get better at testing animals, it seems like a lot more animals than we originally thought are passing these self-awareness tests. So one self-awareness test for animals is you put an animal in front of a mirror and you let them check themselves out in this mirror, and then you remove the mirror and maybe you put them to sleep, like give them some just like sedative, and you paint a little dot on their forehead. And then when they wake up, you put them back in front of the mirror and you see if they notice the dot. Like, do they try to rub the dot? Are they aware of themselves in this mirror? And very few animals pass this test. So like elephants passed it, dolphins passed it, some of the great apes passed it, but like dogs didn't pass it, horses didn't pass it, and a wide range of more animals failed than passed, much more. So researchers conclude that these animals are self-aware and all these other animals are not. But the problem is that a lot of these experimental designs were not that great. So here's one, for example, dogs in particular, they are not visual creatures. So their experience of the world is not visual. Human beings are visual creatures. Our primary sense organ is our vision. Like we can see far distances, we can make out shapes, we can see a wide range of colors, which really helps us from an evolutionary point of view, understand danger, understand when it's safe, like, and even in terms of like what we eat, what food we're allowed to eat. We can identify by color whether it's something good or something bad. Like you can see mold growing on something, we're not going to eat it. If we see something fresh and buy a fresh red apple, we're going to eat it. And we can identify that all through the sense of sight. We don't have that great of a olfactory system or smell, the way that we smell. Like, yeah, sure, we can smell a wide range of things, but it's not that great. Now, dogs, on the other hand, it's kind of flipped. Their vision is it's okay. They can see a wide range of things, but not nearly as well as we can see things. But their olfactory system is amazing. It is like 10 times, if not more, powerful than our smelling system. So, we use dogs to smell cancer, to smell bombs, to smell drugs, and they do a great job at all of these things just in virtue of using their nose. So this mirror test is designed for vision dominant creatures. You're looking with your eyes, with your vision at yourself in a mirror. Recently, researchers have done self-awareness tests with dogs using their olfactory system. So they put some of the dog's own urine out and had the dog smell its own urine, and then they put some other scents in that urine to see if they would notice, like a dot on the head. Would you notice that your face has changed? With the dogs, they put a little bit of like a dot in the urine, but in terms of like smelling, so like I think they used another dog's urine, or they used just some other kind of fragrance in the urine. And these dogs picked up on that immediately. They were extremely like preoccupied with that scent, and they wouldn't get over it. Like they were fixated on their urine that didn't smell like their urine. So the researchers wanted to conclude that, yeah, dogs are self-aware, but they're not self-aware in terms of being visually aware of what they look like. They're self-aware of being olfactorily aware of what they smell like. So their whole identity is in relation to their olfactory system, not their visual system. Whereas our identity is highly related to our visual system. Like who we are is like what we look like for a lot of, at least in terms of this experimental design. Now, you might have criticisms about this design in terms of how it relates to self-awareness and especially how it relates to self-consciousness. Because I just said, like, self-consciousness is the ability to identify yourself as yourself independent of the rest of the world. So it seems like if I can identify that there's a dot on my forehead, then I can identify that myself is independent even from this paint on my forehead, which is external to me. But the idea here is that these dogs are able to identify that they smell a certain way, and when you contaminate their scent, they can identify that this is not them. That contamination is independent from who they are. But all these questions of self-consciousness and self-awareness really boil down to personal identity, which is another incredibly interesting topic in philosophy, which is this problem of what makes you you over time. So I would ask this question in person and I would get a lot of chuckles, but like, are you the same person you were when you were 5 years old? Are you the same person you were 5 minutes ago? And if you said yes to both of those things, why? What makes you the same person over time? Is it your body, like your physical body? Some philosophers have tried to say that, yeah, like you are the same person over time because you have the same body. But then other philosophers come up with these certain objections, like, well, if you lose a finger, are you no longer the same person? Now here, I would always get tripped up of this when I was an undergrad, but I'm not meaning like, have you changed? Like, obviously, if you lost a finger, you're changed. Like, you're going to be doing things different. Like, you'll text differently without this finger. You might that might have been a really traumatic experience. So like, you might have some like emotional baggage from that experience. But you're still fundamentally, from a metaphysical point of view, from this like personhood point of view, the same person. You haven't fundamentally changed. Like your intrinsic characteristics haven't changed, despite the fact that you're missing a finger now. And another way to think about this is that our cells are constantly dying and replenishing themselves. So over, I think, 7 years, your entire cell makeup has either died off and replaced itself or is in the process of doing that. But it's the same person, right? Despite the fact that your cells are completely different than they were 7 years ago. So imagine like you're 40, your cells are not going to be the same as what they were when you were 2. But some people want to say that you're the same person despite the fact that your body, your physical makeup has changed entirely. Some other people have said that what makes you over time are your memories. And so this is highly related to first person perspective and psychological continuity. So I have memories of what I was doing a week ago. I have memories of what I was doing 5 years ago. And I have some memories of when I was a child. Those memories are blurry and distant. And I'm not even sure if they're like real memories or if they're fabricated memories, but I do have memories of being a young child. And it's that continuity that makes me the same person over time, that, no one else has the same memories that I have. Like, even if I share experiences with like my brother and I did a lot of things when we were young, and I'm sure that I have a memory of going to the beach in Puerto Penasco with him, and he has that memory of being at the beach in Puerto Penasco with me. But my memories are different from his memories. Like, I have a certain first person perspective that he doesn't have. So I'm seeing the world from this point of view, and no one else sees the world from this point of view. Only me. You all have your own first person perspective. You're watching this video from a perspective that I have no idea about. I can kind of think about it and I can imagine what it's like to be you. Like, I can imagine that, you're watching this video maybe after work and you're tired and you're maybe a little bit bored, or I hope not, but maybe you are. And I can have all these like imaginations about it, but I don't know what it's like. I am not living it. I only have a third person point of view of what you're living. and I have my first person point of view of what I'm living, and that my first person perspective has not changed. So that when I was born, when I was brought into this world, I had this perspective, and as I've grown up into an adult, this perspective has remained with me only and no one else. And so maybe that's what makes me over time. And then, of course, there's the soul. So, a lot of you may be thinking about the soul in terms of like a theology kind of framework for religion, but the soul is actually a highly, highly debated topic in philosophy because the soul is able to solve this problem of personal identity. What makes me over time the same person is my soul, what my this non-material entity that is me and only me and no one else. So if I cut off a finger, my soul hasn't been damaged. If I lost a memory, my soul hasn't been damaged or changed or anything. And the soul is related to this debate in the philosophy of mind called the mind-body problem. So it's this idea that like my body can go through all these changes, but my mind, it seems like it has properties that my body doesn't have, and my body has properties that my mind doesn't have. And if they don't share all the same properties, then maybe they're not the same thing. And this philosopher Rene Descartes talked about this, and decades, millennial ago, and philosophers to this day are still highly, highly engaged in this debate because it's another debate that has not been fully solved, that does not have a satisfactory answer yet. And again, this is independent from religion, but it's highly related to religion. So most religions do accept the existence of some kind of soul, some kind of non-material entity that is fundamental to who we are as persons, and it can't be damaged. It can't be changed in the way that your physical body can, and it can exist beyond your physical body. So that could be a potential answer to this person identity problem. But this is why philosophy is so interesting, is to answer these ethical questions about what makes a person and who has moral rights and who has moral responsibilities. You have to dive into the metaphysics. You have to dive into the philosophy of mind. And if you want to open up the Pandora's box of the mind-body problem, you're going to be diving into a debate that, like I said, doesn't have a satisfactory answer. And if you want to ground your ethics in some debate that hasn't had a satisfactory answer yet, then you best have some really good reasons for accepting the existence of a soul over existence with just a purely physical body, because there are some definite problems with positing the existence of a soul. There's the problem of causation, like how does this non-material thing cause your physical body to do stuff? How does that interaction occur? But then on the flip side, like I said, it doesn't seem like our minds share all the properties that our bodies have, and our bodies share all the properties that our minds have. And that's a logical principle that if two things have different properties, then they're not the same thing. But I'm getting off a bit of on a tangent, but the idea here is that personal identity issues of the metaphysics of the philosophy of mind are highly related to issues of ethics. And we're talking ethical theory right now, but our ethical theory is what's going to ground our applied ethics. So if you haven't had a foundation of metaphysics yet, then how can we even start talking about these applied issues like abortion and all these other really, really highly contentious topics? Okay. So now we're back to marginal cases. I didn't spend that much on the psychological continuity or this memory theory, but again, if you take some kind of metaphysics class and maybe even a little bit of philosophy of mind, you could cover a little bit more about these issues. But related to both self-awareness, rational capacity, even psychological continuity, maybe first-person perspective, we have the problem of these marginal cases. So these are these very, very young human children, maybe even the unborn children. I know a lot of you are really interested in the topic of abortion just in virtue of what you've been writing about in your discussion questions, what examples you used for your first paper. But these populations of people how do they fit into this personhood criteria? So these population of humans, I should really just stick with humans rather than use people, because people treat people, humans, others treat the word people as just a plural of person. But again, I want to remain adamant how person is a highly technical term in philosophy, and so it's not just humans. It might be more than the human population. So some people want to say that in order to, like I said, theories of personhood, a lot of them are trying to make a uh, uh, distinction between humans and non-human animals. But when they appeal to rational capacity, when they appeal to psychological continuity, when they appeal to self-awareness, they end up leaving out some humans. So very young human children, like infants, like a newborn baby, even like maybe even a 2-year-old, they don't have rational capacity. They don't have self-awareness yet. They don't have psychological continuity. Um, they don't have these conditions that the philosophers have outlined make a person a person. The same thing goes for the severely mentally disabled. They don't have any of these things. They can't use practical rationality. They don't have theoretical rationality. They're not self-aware. They don't have any kind of psychological continuity. Surely they have a first-person perspective, but surely many animals have first-person perspectives. And yeah, so where do they fit? Are they persons or are they not persons? And then there's also these like the demented, so like your demented grandma, suffering from Alzheimer's, like end stage Alzheimer's. She doesn't have rational capacity, theoretical or practical. She doesn't have any psychological continuity. She doesn't have any of her memories. And she doesn't have that self-awareness anymore. And then the humans in vegetative state, so you're a normal functioning adult human being riding your motorcycle, and then you get plowed by a semi. You have extreme brain damage, and you're in this vegetative state. You don't have these capacities anymore. So how do philosophers respond to this? So some have said they really, really rely on this capacity, like I was saying. The capacity matters even if it's never actualized. So these very young human children and unborn children, sure, they're not rational yet, but they will be. When they grow up, they're going to develop these capacities and then they will become persons. So although they are not yet persons, they will become persons. And so they should still be classified as persons because of their potentiality to become persons. And some want to go as far as to say it doesn't matter if it's never even actualized. So, like with the severely mentally disabled, they have this capacity, and this goes back to human nature. And perhaps the idea is that human nature is necessarily this rational capacity. That's what makes us human. And so, all of these people either had it and then lost it, don't have it but will get it yet, and maybe don't have it and never will have it, but in virtue of just being a human being, they have the capacity. So it doesn't matter if it's never actualized, they have that human nature, and that's what makes them persons. But the problem here is the same problems I was outlining above, is that it seems like some animals are the better we get at measuring animal cognition, the more positive results we're getting from animals, the more that they are showing us with their purely behavior, non-linguistic behaviors, that they can do a lot of these rational things, and they have this self-awareness, they have this sophisticated cognition that we thought was purely unique to human beings. So the idea that I'm trying to stress here is that you have to be consistent. If you're going to appeal to some rational capacity in order to make some distinction between persons and not persons, then you got to say, like, okay, then the severely mentally disabled are not persons then. Or if you like, that's one way to go. But I think a lot of people, for the moral reasons, want to say that that's just not, that's not ideal. Like, we want these humans to have moral rights. We don't want the severely mentally disabled to be treated like animals. We don't want to use them in these in horrendous experimentations where we, drop anti-aging wrinkle cream in their eyes to make sure it doesn't cause a reaction. And sometimes it will cause a reaction and burn their eyes and blind them, like it does to the animals that we did these experiments on. But if they're non-persons, it should, from a moral standpoint, be justifiable to use them in those experiments. Like, that's the point here, right? Like, if we can treat animals this way because they're non-persons, then we should be able to round up all the severely mentally disabled and treat them that same way. But that's a problem, right? Like, I don't want to do that. And I think a lot of you guys don't want to do that. Like, despite the fact that these humans don't have rational capacity, aren't self-aware, don't have psychological continuity, I still don't want to run these experiments on them. But if you don't want to run these experiments on them, then your criteria of personhood needs to include some non-human animals, because some non-human animals, just, it's a matter of fact that their psychology, their cognition is more sophisticated, is more robust, is higher level than some human beings. And I focus on the severely mentally disabled because of their lack of actualizing this capacity. And I would say that they don't have the capacity. Despite being a human being, they lack the capacity to ever reason and use rationality. So there's two sides of the camp. There's one camp that wants to say, okay, no, all humans are different from all non-human animals. And they try to, like, weasel their way past these marginal cases by appealing to human nature, by appealing to capacity rather than actuality. I'm on the other side of the camp. I want to say that no, either some humans are non-persons and therefore personhood is not morally relevant, so we shouldn't use personhood as a moral criteria to determine how we ought to treat other beings, or some non-human animals are persons that they don't deserve to be treated this way in virtue of being a person. The marginal cases don't deserve to be treated this way in virtue of being persons. So I want to include more creatures into our criteria of personhood rather than exclude portions of the human population as persons. So there's two ways to go about this, but it seems like there's this highly, popular tradition in philosophy to just, make this strict cut between humans and non-humans and say that all the humans count, all the non-humans don't count. And why? Human nature, whatever human nature is, rational capacity, even though humans don't have rational capacities. But in virtue of siding with the camp that says, all right, no, if all humans are persons, then a whole bunch of non-human animals are going to be persons too. Since I'm taking that stance, I'm also a proponent of this idea that we need to treat animals better. Like, these factory farms are not acceptable living conditions. I would not put a severely mentally disabled human in a factory farm to live out a horrible, horrible existence only to be butchered for meat. I would never do that. And along those same lines, I think putting a pig in a factory farm to live out these horrible, horrible conditions is morally unjustifiable. And this isn't like some stance I've taken because I'm a hardcore vegan. Like, I'm not even a vegan. I'm not a vegetarian. I just think that from a philosophical point of view, in order to be consistent. So again, it all comes back to consistency and just logic. The logic of non-contradictions, the necessity that if we run into a contradiction, then one of those propositions is necessarily false. In virtue of the power of logic, I'm going to say that no, we need to treat animals better, because in virtue of us treating animals so horribly, we are living out a contradiction. We are completely inconsistent in our views, and that's morally wrong. It's morally wrong to live a life in this contradiction.